Uh-oh, wait a minute. We're not where we're supposed to be, guys, and y'all hear us, but y'all don't see us yet. So, guys, welcome to another episode of Exit Strategies Radio Show. Hey, I'm your host, Colvin J. Millett, broker and owner of Exit Realty Low Country Group in beautiful North Charleston, South Carolina. Hey, if this is your first time listening to the show, y'all should know what we do here, but we're going to tell you anyway. We are over here empowering our community through financial literacy and real estate education, guys. We're legacy building. That is what we do. So, guys, when you're out there making things happen in your family, we always tell you to please put a hashtag on that thing on social media that tells people that you are setting yourself up, not just for today, but your family up for yet tomorrow, because that is what we're focused on here. So, guys, we are extremely excited, guys. We're going to take today's conversation and our guest today, we're going to the next level. So we want you to grab a pen, want to grab a pad, want to make sure that you're sitting in place, you're sitting still. If you miss any of this, go to our website, exitstrategiesradioshow.com. Again, exitstrategiesradioshow.com. Look for this episode and make sure that you go through it with a fine-tooth comb. So today we are so honored to have with us Chris Cuniff with Engel Volkers Real Estate. How are you doing today, sir?
Hey, Corwin, doing great. Thank you for having me on the show.
You are quite welcome. So look, you and I, we go way back. You know, we actually, fortunately, bumped into each other recently at an event. You know, we had a great time, good food, good drinks, all that stuff. Shout out to Firefire Distillery down in North Charleston, South Carolina. If y'all ain't been over there, they have a magnificent facility kind of tucked in, you know, off the street, but kind of tucked in there real good, but a real nice environment, real nice vibe, guys. And most importantly, they have some amazing drinks. So y'all go by and see them folks and have a good time. But you and I, we started serving. That's where we bumped into each other in our service to our industry a number of years ago in our association. So it's always great to have, you know, I tell people we focus on the latest, the greatest, and the best over here at Exit Strategies Radio Show. You and I have been around for a while, so we ain't gonna say we the latest, but I sure want to have you on the show as being one of
we've been around the block, that's for sure.
Exactly. So, Chris, today I'm popping up your presentation so we can, you know, start this conversation. But if you don't mind, introduce yourself to our listeners, and then let's jump into, you know, we're talking about strategies for investors to use in the acquisition and purchase of real estate. So let's start, first of all, you introducing yourself. So tell our listeners who you are.
Sure. No, I appreciate the opportunity to introduce myself to your listeners. It's great to be here today. I am Chris Cuniff. I'm with Engel & Volkers Real Estate. We have a shop locally in the Mount Pleasant area. I have been in and around real estate since 1996. I started my career in real estate as a real estate attorney, and I did that for 8 years in New York City and in Charleston. And then I hopped over the fence and got into the real estate brokerage business in 2004. And shortly thereafter, Corwin, was probably when I met you and was involved with some of the committees on the Realtor Association. I handled both commercial and residential real estate. Mm-hmm. But back in my attorney days, I used to do quite a bit of work with clients, helping them with so-called 1031 exchange transactions. Mm-hmm. And this is where an investor owns a piece of real estate, they sell it, but they want to see if there's a way for them to defer payment of the capital gains tax that they would normally pay on the sale of an investment property. Mm-hmm. So that's one of my areas of expertise, and I was happy to be invited to come on the show and share a little bit of knowledge about how 1031 exchanges work and how they could be of value to your listening audience.
So there's another reference for a 1031, and some people refer to it, you know, people that have been around long before me, maybe before you, refer to it as a starker exchange.
Yeah, and I think that might be a reference to a court case. I'm not 100% sure, but yes, I've heard that reference as well. But nowadays, the 1031, for most 1031 exchanges, they're done under what some people call a safe harbor, which is a provision of the tax code where the IRS has basically said, hey, if you follow the following procedures, and you follow the letter of the law in following these procedures, we're not going to question whether your exchange is a legitimate transaction. We're going to allow it.
Mm-hmm.
So there is, in some schools of people that are more expert than me in tax law, there might be some other areas that you can get into outside of the safe harbor. What we're going to talk about is just strictly within the safe harbor. And this gives me a good chance to say something else, which is I am, a professional realtor. I am not a tax lawyer.
Mm-hmm.
And I always tell my realtor friends as well, whenever we give advice to clients about 1031 exchanges, we always need to add a proviso, which is, please talk to your attorney or
Mm-hmm.
please talk to your CPA, because 1031 exchanges can be very focused on the particular facts and circumstances of the particular case. And you need to make sure you get good tax or accounting advice if you're going to pursue one.
Perfect. Perfect. So that's our disclaimer, guys, as you
Yeah.
listen to this today. So, Chris, if you don't mind, so break this thing down. So, first of all, for our listeners, we're going to bring you to a point. But, Chris, I want you to definitely, take over going forward.
Yeah.
This is for you guys that are investors or seeking to be investors. And this is a strategy to help you guys offset taxation as you grow your investment portfolio, so to speak.
Yeah.
So Chris, how does this play out for, let's say, someone who is starting, an investment portfolio, and now they're looking, let's say they've acquired a property or two, and they're looking to now maybe reposition out of those properties into a larger property, let's say from single doors to, a multifamily or something of that nature.
Right. And that's a good example of how 1031 can come into play. It could be someone who has a rental property, a single family home, and let's say, for example, that home is worth $250,000, and they sell it. And instead of paying the taxes and putting the money in the bank, they say, I want to see if I could avoid or defer, really, the payment of the taxes. And through the 1031 exchange process, have the money put into escrow. And then I could acquire, let's say it's a quadplex. So now I'm moving from a single family rental to a quadplex. And let's say the quadplex is worth $500,000. And so the 1031 exchange mechanism is a method for the taxpayer to essentially continue their investment and roll the proceeds over into the next investment, which is typically or ideally is of equal or greater value than the prior investment. And that allows the taxpayer to defer the payment of taxes. And this is one important point to talk about, which is the deferral is not a forgiveness. The IRS is not forgiving the taxes, but what they're basically saying, we're not going to tag you right now.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to let you kick the can down the road a little bit, and potentially when you sell the replacement property, the taxes could kick in then, unless maybe you do another 1031 exchange.
Mm-hmm.
So some taxpayers have used this tool to basically continually defer the obligation to pay the gain from a capital gain on a sale of a property. Now, I want to just quickly distinguish this because people sometimes get them confused. This kind of mechanism only applies to investment property or property held for productive use in a trade or business.
Mm-hmm.
It does not apply to any kind of personal residence property. And I think on the slide, hopefully your viewers can see it if they're not on the radio, if they're looking at a computer screen, that we have a comparison on the screen that shows the difference between Section 1031 and another section of the code called Section 121 that allows, upon the sale of a personal residence, the taxpayer to exclude up to $250,000 for a single individual or $500,000 for a couple upon the sale of their personal residence. Now that rule, that's a true exclusion or forgiveness of tax when you sell your personal residence. The IRS is not deferring it. They're actually forgiving it or excluding it from tax. So that's an important differential between these two tools. The residential tool is Section 121, and then the tool for commercial investors or any kind of duplex, triplex, single family rental type property, that's going to be 1031.
So, a lot of agents, for our listeners, guys, a lot of agents and a lot of people don't understand the separation here. There is an exclusion, again, Section 121 for gains or capital gains on the sale of a primary residence. But we're on the investment side with 1031. So, let's follow this. But Chris, all right, so we're talking about, let's talk about, again, what kind of properties qualify for the 1031.
Sure. So again, it's any kind of commercial investment, property held for investment purpose, property held in connection with a trade or business. And the important thing to know about 1031 is that it's very, very broad in terms of the real estate that can qualify. It used to be, in fact, that 1031 could apply to things other than real estate as well. In 2018, Congress revised the law, and they now limit 1031 only to real estate. Mm-hmm. But basically, any real estate located in the United States can qualify, so long as it is for those purposes, for investment, for use in a trade or business, et cetera, and not for personal use and not for primary residence use. So one example I like to give, and I have a couple things on the screen right now, is that if you have a farm in Iowa, say, and you want to sell it and you want to buy the Empire State Building in New York City, those two properties can be considered like-kind properties for a 1031 exchange, even though they're extremely different in nature. Mm-hmm. So it's not the use of the property, it's really the intent. Mm-hmm. It's the intent, whether it's held for investment purposes or not. So long as it's held for investment purposes, it's going to qualify.
Okay. So that's very broad. So for our listeners, for some clarification on here, you can't buy a piece of property, defer the taxes, let's say investment property, and then move into the property, because then you change the use of it. So, once you do this, if you decide you're going to do this, and you can't, technically, so matter of fact, this is a very good question, Chris.
Yeah.
Can someone let's say they're selling a property, can they take some of the money out, some of the profit out, and put it in their pocket?
Well, so it's a couple of things to get into here, and just riding on what you were saying there. First, on the conversion of the property, I would say it may be possible if a property is held as a primary residence, and let's say someone moves out of it as a primary residence and they rent it out for 3 or 4 or 5 years as an investment property, it mm-hmm. may be possible to convert a property from one category to another. But mm-hmm. that's, again, something you need to talk to your CPA or your attorney about.
Okay.
But in terms of putting money in your pocket, you can put money in your pocket upon the sale of a property and then do a 1031 exchange for the remainder of the funds. But if you do that, it's not going to be a fully deferred exchange. So really, if you want to fully defer the tax and avoid any kind of taxation, you've got to avoid touching the money. And this gives me a chance to talk about, some of the basic requirements of a 1031 exchange. And this is under the safe harbor that the IRS provides. One requirement is that when the closing happens, the money that is going to be used in the exchange needs to be deposited with what they call a qualified intermediary, or sometimes we call it a QI for short. Mm-hmm. And a qualified intermediary is an independent third party. It can't be your brother-in-law. It actually cannot be your attorney. It cannot be your own CPA. It cannot be your own financial advisor. It has to be someone who is completely independent of you. Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of title insurance companies that have subsidiaries that provide this service, and those are very often who we refer our clients to when they need to do a 1031. But mm-hmm. that neutral third party will hold the money while you wait to identify the replacement property and then close on the replacement property. And then, two other quick rules to go over that are very basic to this. Once you sell the property, in our example from before, let's say you have that single family rental property and you schedule the closing. And at the closing, the money is deposited with the qualified intermediary and you sign all the documents to authorize them to hold the money and prepare for an exchange. You then have 45 days to identify what will be your replacement property. And if you fail to identify a property within that 45 days, then the exchange will fail and it will become a taxable event. So it's very important that you be watching the clock, that you mark your calendar, mm-hmm. and that you go to work on trying to identify what will be your replacement property.
So we run into this a lot. I mean, yeah. So a lot, where people have, they're in the middle of a 1031. They have obviously a compliance period we're talking about. And in turn, they're technically in a rush because sometimes they forget to put the date on the calendar. So they ran themselves up against the period, one of the period deadlines, and now they're rushing to identify a property to be able to move forward with.
Yeah, and it's actually the much safer thing to do if you really want to plan ahead is even before you sell your property or before the closing happens, if you want to be, you should be looking around earlier to start to identify, because that 45 days will go very, very quickly.
Very, very, very true. So, Chris, look, let's take a quick pause right here. But if you don't mind, before we take that breath, give our listeners your contact information because
Yeah.
they're inevitably people want to know more about this.
Yeah. Feel free to reach out to me if you have questions about 1031 exchanges and how they work. My cell phone number is area code 843-697-4014. Or you can send me an email, and it's my first name, Chris, then a dot, my last name, Cunniff, Cunniffe, at evrealestate.com.
Awesome. Chris, thank you so much. So, guys, put a quick pause right here, flip the flapjack, and as we always say, we'll be right back. All right? Congratulations to Exit Realty Low Country Group's Realtor of the Week, none other than Monica Wright, Right Home for You. You can reach Monica by dialing 843-452-0111 or text Right Home for You, that is WRIGHTHOMEFORYOU to 85377. Again, Right Home for You. You all give Monica a holler now and find your right home. Guys, we are back. Second segment, Exit Strategy Radio Show. Hey, I'm your host, Coleman J. Millett, broker and owner of Exit Realty, Low Country Group. Today, we are talking about legacy building. This is what we're talking about. We have with us Chris Cunniff with Engel and Volkers Real Estate. He's talking to us about 1031 tax exchanges, deferring the taxes on the sale of rental property, investment property. So, Chris, before the break, we were kind of in the middle of, for you, those of you guys who are watching us online, guys, we have a slide and we're going along. But for those of you who are not, we want you to know where we are. So where we are, we're in the middle of identifying property. You sold a property, you got to identify another one. Chris, what is the next step that our listeners need to be aware of?
Yeah, so in that identification process, there's two primary ways you can go about that. If you're not certain, you might just identify one property and that'll be it. If you feel very confident that that's the property that you can acquire and want to acquire. But you are actually allowed to identify up to 3 different potential replacement properties. The advantage to identifying 3 is, let's say you put one under contract and you do an inspection and you find out all kinds of horrible things about the roof or the foundation or whatever like that. And you say, no, this one is not for me. Well, then you have some backup options because you've selected potentially up to 3 replacement properties. Now, you only have to close on one of them so long as the value is equal or greater than the one that you're selling. Mm-hmm. And then the other option would be you can actually identify an unlimited number of properties so long as they don't exceed 200% of the value. Mm-hmm. So if you sell a property in our earlier example for $250,000, you could identify 4 properties or 5 properties so long as the total value doesn't exceed $500,000, which is that 200% threshold. Mm-hmm. So the IRS gives you some flexibility here on the identification. And the other key thing about the timetable is that you have a total of 180 days to close. Now, this 45-day period and this 180-day period, importantly, they are not back to back. They run simultaneously. So the first 45 days is the first 45 days of the 180. And then you have the remaining part of that 180 left to do the closing.
Okay. That's helpful. So that gives someone who's in the middle of this a little bit more time to figure it out, get it done, make sure they get it done the right way, right?
Yeah.
All right. So go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah. So and I was going to, the next topic I was just going to briefly introduce, and I won't go into it in too much depth, is what in the business, the people that are tax experts talk about this phrase boot. And boot is not footwear. I'll have a little picture of a boot on my screen. Boot is a term of art that people in the industry use to describe when you do not achieve a fully deferred exchange, when you receive something that you were not supposed to receive, such as if you put some of the cash in your pocket, that's considered boot, and that portion of the exchange will not be allowed. The other important part that people tend to forget is that the IRS wants you to fully replace the value. So if you sell that $250,000 rental house, they want you to acquire the next property at $250,000 or greater. And so you want to, otherwise it's not going to be considered a fully deferred exchange. It will only be considered a partially deferred exchange. And there's a complex formula about how you calculate how much gain you have. But If you have debt, for instance, on the property, let's say that property that you sell for 250 had a mortgage of 125. When you go to do the replacement property, you can't just reinvest the cash, the 125 cash. You've got to either take out a new mortgage equal or greater to the old mortgage, or if you have additional cash in some other bank account on the sidelines, you can put in new cash to replace the mortgage. But the main point is if you sold the property for 250 and you wanted to fully defer the tax, you've got to acquire a new property of that value or greater.
Okay. Makes sense. Makes
Yeah.
perfect sense. So how can people, again, you can go up or down on property. And obviously that's one of
Yeah.
the things that, someone may decide, okay, I have two properties, single doors. I want to go to a multi-door property, 4 or whatever, how many doors. So that's going up.
Mm-hmm.
But what if you have the multi-door property, but you want to downsize into, let's say, I say downsize, but you want to come down and spread that among other properties, multiple properties.
Yeah.
And that's, you do that?
That's something you could do. So yeah, if you have, let's say you have a 10-unit property and you decide you're tired of having a large property. Earlier we mentioned that 3 property rule. So you could, let's say that 10-unit property was worth $1 million and you want to get into something different. And you could buy 3 properties that are $400,000 each.
Mm-hmm.
And that would add up to $1.2 million, right? And so that, and they could be single family rentals, or they could be duplexes or triplexes, whatever it might be. But so long as the total value is equal or greater than the value of the one you had before, you could achieve a fully deferred exchange.
Mm-hmm. Interesting.
So, Cor, one last thing maybe just to talk about in terms of big picture with 1031 exchanges would be, hey, what are the motivations? What are the typical motivations that people have for 1031? Obviously, deferring the tax is the big thing, but there are some other business reasons why someone might do a 1031.
Mm-hmm.
So one would be to reallocate, and you started to hint at this, if you wanted to reallocate the type of investment property you have.
Mm-hmm.
We very often see people do this if they own vacant land that's become very valuable.
Yep.
And might be family land, and the vacant land doesn't generate any income for the family.
Mm-hmm.
So they decide to sell it and buy an income producing property. It could be a commercial shopping center. It could be a multifamily residential rental property, but something that generates income. So reallocating from vacant to improved property, that's a very common tool for 1031. Another similar idea of reallocation is a geographic reallocation. So we've had, in our own universe of clients here, I had a client that had a whole bunch of rental property in New York. They relocated their personal residence to South Carolina, and we helped them acquire 5 or 6 duplexes, triplexes, quadplexes, investment properties here in South Carolina. And they were basically slowly reallocating their portfolio from New York to South Carolina. And that's another very powerful way that 1031 can be of assistance to investors when there's a geographic relocation going on, especially, as long as it's within the United States.
Mm-hmm. That's powerful. I have one of our agents here shared the story of a client who utilized the 1031 in Maryland. They purchased what was a sales model down in Florida. So their intention was essentially to retire down to Florida. So they purchased a sales model from a builder and then in turn rented the builder the sales model back. So for the builder, the advantage in that situation obviously is it is a lease now. They're leasing the home. So they get to write that off. So they get their benefit for doing that. For the investor, they were able to acquire a home that they retired after a few years. So then they were able to make the transition, make that into their primary home. In the process, defer taxation until they made the conversion. But it was at retirement age, which then saved them some money there as well.
Yeah.
So that's the thing that sometimes people miss. What I refer to as the diamond or the beauty that real estate is, it offers people the ability to leverage themselves. We always looking at it with a singular point of view when real estate is just like a diamond, is multifaceted.
Yeah.
So, Chris, if you don't mind, give our listeners your contact information one more time.
Sure. Yeah. It's Chris Cuniff. My cell phone is 843-697-4014. And you can reach me by email at chris.cuniff@evrealestate.com.
So, Chris, every real estate professional that we bring on the show, we always want to know this one thing. If you
Yeah.
could tell a consumer, buyer or seller in this particular climate, what they should be doing, what would that be?
Well, I think, there's a danger right now because the market is appreciating so quickly and we have sort of a feeding frenzy environment. My biggest piece of advice would be to not get caught up in the frenzy. That's a real danger out there right now, is to always do your homework. I'm sure if you're working with a good realtor, they're going to give you lots of data about comparable sales in the community that you might be looking at. And there's nothing wrong with maybe paying a little bit more than the last sale in the neighborhood because we're in a rising market, but just be careful about overdoing it and getting caught in a situation where you feel like you have to, jump into something extreme.
Fair, fair, very fair. Well, Chris,
Yeah.
thank you so much for taking the time out today
Sure, Corn.
to be on the show with us. Thank you so much for sharing the information. For our listeners, guys, thank you so much for tuning in. But most importantly, don't just tune in, don't just listen. Make sure that you hear what was shared here with us today. Make sure that you apply this information not only just to your personal life, but to those around you, to your family, your friends, your coworkers, church members. Look here, we can't sit here and praise the Lord and be together in that, but yet and still we divided on every other issue or every other thing. That doesn't work. So please make sure that you apply this information. Make sure that you reach out to Chris. He can share more, but most importantly, he can help you along the way in these processes, because that is what we are here to do. We're here to serve and help one another. We want to make sure that we're doing that for you, and most importantly, that we're engaged in it with you. So thank you so much, Chris. It's
Thank
been
you.
a pleasure. So as we close out today's show, we gave y'all some profound information. Profound. Go back, watch the show. If you're listening in the car now, go back and watch the show when it airs and posts on Monday. Find us on YouTube, on social media. Find us anywhere, because that's where we are, everywhere. And make sure that you apply this again to your life. You know what we always say to you guys, to our listeners, we love you, we love you, we love you. And I'm going to see you guys out there in those streets.